I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. I will open tonight's meeting and ask if the board has any public comment.
Just one.
Mrs. Luck.
I'd like to thank the Lunenburg Lions Club members for making up over 100 food baskets for local families in need the Sunday before Thanksgiving. The effort, spearheaded by Dave Berthume, was a miracle of organization, as 3 boxes for each family was filled in just about an hour's time. There were people running all over the fire station. It was great. Then the receiving families began to arrive to pick up the precious cargo. It was heartwarming and a joyous event to participate in. Thanks again to the Lions.
You do great work. Anybody else?
Just to note that I'll have more information for next meeting. The fundraiser for one of the families that was burned out at Andrew Hall down the street will be coming up later this month. I'll have that more information next Tuesday.
Excellent, thank you.
I just have one. I want to thank everyone that assisted in the lights in the town center.
Yeah.
It looks absolutely beautiful, and that was done by many volunteers, and I want to thank all of them for their hard work.
It is beautiful.
And I will say also that thank you to everybody who made last night possible for the annual tree lighting at Town Center at the gazebo. I'd like to thank the superintendent for asking me to host, and everybody who participated, the band director, people who did the lights. Again, the Family Lions Club helped with the decorations. Same people who decorated Town Center, decorated the gazebo. Jack Rodriguez and the DPW helped shovel out the walks to make it safe for everybody. We had sound provided by the athletic department at the high school. I'm sure I'm leaving people out, but there's a lot of people who invest a lot of time to make that happen. And now the town center decorations are open. I guess I should say that the letters to Santa, the mailbox is open for any children who want to submit letters to Santa into the mailbox at Town Center, and they will be regularly picked up and delivered. One more announcement that from the Lunenburg Gift Mart Committee. They are planning their 6th annual Gift Mart. Gift Mart is being held in mid-December by invitation only through the Lunenburg Food Pantry and local churches. Donations of unwrapped gifts are displayed for folks to shop for their families, and supplies are limited. Last year, Gift Mart helped 80+ Lunenburg families, and the hope is to help more this year. To do this, we need your help. There will be gift collection boxes around town at the Lunenburg Public Library and various businesses. Please help by donating new unwrapped gifts or warm clothing by December 10th, or mail monetary donations to Nancy Carolo, 12 Whitetail Crossing, Lunenburg, Mass. 01462. Again, for those who may use the monetary donations, Nancy Carolo, Kerylou, at 12 Whitetail Crossing in Lunenburg. All checks must be made out to Gift Mart, and they thank you for your support, and you can check them out online at lunenburggiftmart.com. Earlier this evening, from 6 to 7, we met with the newly formed Public Access Cable Committee, and we want to thank the 3 members of that committee for coming in and helping us have a roundtable discussion and fill them in on the new bylaw and the expectations, both theirs and ours, of what the committee would be doing. We're very pleased that they are serving, and they will be having their first meeting, I believe, December 15th, Monday, December 15th at 6 p.m. at the TC Passios TV studio, the PAC studio. There are still two vacancies on that, but now we have the committee up and going. So if anybody is interested, I would suggest that they attend that meeting as part of the public. It is going to be vested in creating, that committee will be vested in creating policies about how cable goes forward in town, both for government bodies and government televised events, as well as public access events. So there's a lot that they'll be doing, and we are very pleased to have them on board and to have that committee back up and running again. So thank you to those three and to the members of the board for their participation in the meeting. Any public comment from the public? Okay, we have a public hearing. Does the public hearing have to wait till 7:15 exactly?
Yes.
I believe it does, okay. So,
Do you, I
wanna
can
do the
talk
write-up first?
about, I can talk about the budget for a
Go
few
ahead.
minutes if you would
Yes.
like to do that. So in preparation for your public hearing at 7:15, I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes talking about the fiscal 2015 budget, because there have been a few changes since the budget was approved at town meeting that I think are worth mentioning and will help inform the public hearing on setting the tax rate. So based on the changes to new growth and the cherry sheet, what we will present to you this evening is a budget that is under the levy limit of $258,521. That might be a little bit different than what the assessor has. This is what was provided by the town accountant. We've talked previously about new growth. Our new growth is $112,484 higher than what we originally projected. And maybe a month or so ago, we talked about that, specifically mentioned the fact that the solar projects, the equipment associated with that, will not come through as a pilot. It comes as new growth, so it's included there. So that was the big difference there. So it's not that there's a difference in the amount of revenue that the town will receive in total. It's just going to come in as tax rather than a pilot. And that's based on a ruling by the Department of Revenue that was promulgated after we adopted that pilot. There were a number of changes to the cherry sheet that have occurred through the adoption of the state budget, which occurred after we adopted our budget. So when we put our budget together and present it to town meeting, typically the state has not adopted its budget, so sometimes there are changes, and those changes can have an impact on our budget. Most of these are very typical. We see some adjustments to the charter tuition and choice tuition, both the receiving and the sending tuition. Some small other changes, but the one big difference that we see this year is smart growth, the 40S additional educational aid that the town will receive as a result of the 40R, which is the Tri-Town development. And we were recently notified that we will receive $183,618, which was of a surprise to most of us, because we have attempted to apply for this funding each year that we believe we've been eligible since that first Tri-Town building came online, and have been told that we're not eligible to apply, either because of the date of the issuance of the certificate of occupancies, or because our increased educational expenses related to students at that development don't exceed the additional tax revenue that the town receives as a result of that development. Now, I don't believe we were ever even able to provide any data to the state up until this year. This past September, we were finally able to provide the data, and actually Harold Scheid, our assessor, was the one who spearheaded this project, and so we were able to apply for the first time. And we were notified that we would receive that amount, and we received that amount on October 31st. And for the last several weeks, we have all been trying to find out, how did you come up with this? Because even though we were able to apply, we essentially gave them data they asked for. They put it into a spreadsheet, so we haven't seen the spreadsheet. I spoke with the director at Department of Local Services today, and she said she is aware of our request to see that spreadsheet. They're in the process of putting it into a format that we can make sense of. So
That'll be helpful.
What I was, and she walked me through it on the phone, so, and I did send an email out to you, so you have this that you can look at later on. But essentially, they look at the expenses that are related to, there are 27 students that are in this development. They look at the actual costs related to educating those 27 students from the prior year, and then they compare that against the tax revenue that is generated both in property tax and motor vehicle excise tax for that property. And that's how they determine what we are eligible for.
So they're looking at those specific students.
They are.
Wow.
They are. So we received the payment. It's a fiscal 15 payment. We received it on October 31st. That poses a unique problem because it is a revenue source that needs to be appropriated by town meeting in order to be spent. We didn't have a fall town meeting. I'm not sure if we had had a fall town meeting, we'd be ready to address this, but we didn't have one, so it has not been addressed. So that money can't be spent until it's appropriated. This is going to continue going forward. We are eligible to apply now every year going forward at the same time. So in September, for funding to be awarded at the end of October. So we will never know what we will have in time for the fiscal year. The way that the state will deal with this going forward is our fiscal 16 estimate will be what we received in fiscal 15. So if we use that as an estimated funding source for fiscal 16, we all have to be aware that it may not be that amount in fiscal 16, and we'll have to have a plan or an agreement on how we are going to address that in the budget if something changes. The state has a line item in their budget for 40S funding. In fiscal 15, it was $500,000. About 450 plus thousand of that was expended this year. There were only 3 communities that applied for that, and one was deemed ineligible. So it's us and one other community that received that in fiscal 15. The director of local services said, you probably want to keep this on your to-do list to keep track of where that is in the budget process, because that's something that is a potential target to be eliminated from the budget, since there are only 2 communities that are benefiting from that. So I've made a note of that, and we'll continue to follow that. In fiscal 15, if there is an interest in trying to access that money, the only way that it could be appropriated is for town meeting to appropriate the same sum out of free cash and then let that 40S funding fall to free cash at the end of the year to replace what we spend in free cash. There isn't any cleaner way to appropriate that.
I just want to interject. So, but if we don't appropriate it, it would fall to free cash
Yes.
on its own?
Yes.
Okay. So the scenario that you said that we would always be playing catch up on the, or a guesstimate, is really not true if we don't use that money till the next year when we know how much we will have gotten. And every year we would have kind of an amount in the fall that we would know what we're getting for the next year if we used it in the following year.
Right, but you'd still need to appropriate
I
it as
understand.
free cash.
Okay.
Because you can't, it will become part of free cash for the prior year.
Are there any restrictions in terms of what it could be appropriated for?
Well, it's educational funding. The one thing I didn't mention is that whatever we receive in 40S funding gets added to our net school spending requirement, which is not an issue for us because we are far above what our requirement is, but it is added to that, and the intention is that it's for educational expenses.
Thank you.
Okay, we can come back to that if we have any questions, but let's get to the public hearing. So at 7:15, we have a public hearing for the fiscal year 2015 tax classification in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 56, on the issue of allocating the local property tax levy among the four classes of real and personal property. And as every year, to give the presentation, we have our regional assessor, Harold Scheid. Welcome.
Good evening. Past years, I've provided you with a single sheet that shows various tax rate scenarios. I have prepared that same sheet for you. It's the last page in the document, but I think you'll find that this is the first year that I've decided to go one step further and provide you with a little bit more information. For the benefit of our two new selectmen, let me just give a couple of introductory remarks about tax classification. Mass General Law requires every city and town once a year to hold a classification hearing. That the main and principal reason for that classification hearing is to determine whether the town should adopt a single tax rate to be applied to all classes of property, or alternatively, as some roughly 110 cities and towns have done, to adopt a split rate. And essentially, under a split tax rate, you're adopting a higher tax rate on commercial and industrial and personal property, commercial and industrial properties, to offset and yield a lower tax rate on residential property owners. For all the reasons I've stated year after year, it doesn't, in my view and the Board of Assessors' view, make much sense in a community that has roughly 10% of its taxable valuation in the commercial and industrial classes. In effect, you end up having to raise the commercial tax rate 10 cents to yield a 1 cent reduction on the residential rate. And you'll see in that last sheet in your handout the various scenarios that show just that. A 10 cent per thousand tax increase on the commercial side and a 1 cent reduction on the residential. I polled the Board of Assessors earlier this evening, and they recommend that the Board of Selectmen adopt a tax factor of 1.0, which in effect yields a uniform or single tax rate across all classes of property. Just a few highlights from the packet that I've prepared for you. We are looking to raise $20,946,583, just under $21 million in property tax revenue. That's up about $500,000, roughly $500,000 from last year. The proposed tax rate, were you to adopt a uniform rate, would be $18.27 per thousand. That would yield about an $87 increase for the owner of a single-family home in town. Somewhat less at $59 for 2- and 3-family homes. And I want to just caution on the condominium increase. The way that increase is calculated may be a little bit deceiving, because most of our residential new growth is in condominiums, and those condominiums tend to be, newer condominiums tend to be higher valued. It tends to skew the average condominium value. In effect, the condominium tax increases would be not the $275 shown here, but something more consistent with what you would see in the single-family homes, probably somewhere in the ballpark of $100 for the year. Let me just comment about valuations. This is a triennial certification year for us. We have successfully completed that exercise with the Department of Revenue. They have certified our valuations. Most property owners will realize little or no change in their assessed valuation. They might go up or down a little bit, but indications are that valuations will change within plus or minus 1% of last year's values. Nothing dramatic to report on that front. Commercial and industrial values likewise will remain relatively unchanged. All of that speaks to a market that, in our estimate, has bottomed out. You'll recall that we have, in most of the, in all of the last 7 years, reduced values in response to a declining real estate market. I think we've hit the floor. In fact, we're poised, I believe, to see the market rebound a bit, and I believe that this time next year, we'll actually report to you that we're actually raising valuations. What's important to bring home to property owners, whether we reduce values or increase values, it's what the town spends that really plays into their tax increases. Valuations play a lesser role. If we're spending more, we have to raise more. We do that through a higher tax rate. And so we are looking at a tax rate increase. Last year's tax rate was $17.99 per thousand. Under a uniform tax rate, we're looking at $18.27 per thousand. I have included for you on the second to the last page a proposed motion. Should you choose to read into your minutes the formal verbiage in the past, I think we've just had you move a very simple motion that would adopt a residential tax factor of 1.0. So. You're certainly free to do that, or alternatively read the motion as shown here. If you were to entertain a split tax rate, it's my view and the Board of Assessors' view that we would really need to, even in advance of a classification hearing, have some serious deliberations about that, and I believe invite commercial property owners to come in and discuss all of that. But our anticipation, and I hope we're not being presumptuous here, is that you would be looking to follow past history and adopt a uniform tax rate. I'll entertain any questions you have.
I've got a question.
Sure.
You mentioned,
Before you go to the question, I just for people, I ask you this every year. In a nutshell, just calculate how we calculate, go through the basic calculation of how we take last year's levy to get to this year's levy and what's included and what the 2.5 includes, just so people are aware.
So we, under Proposition 2.5, we have a calculation that starts with last year's maximum allowable levy. Proposition 2.5, and let me just read that number. Last year, our levy limit was $19,425,844. That's net of any excluded debt. Proposition 2.5 allows us to increase that levy by 2.5%, which adds $485,000 in additional tax revenue that we can raise automatically without going to the voters for what we call a Prop 2.5 override. We also add to our base the $262,000 in new growth revenue. That is revenue coming off of new construction, the solar projects, the many condominiums that have been built, and so forth. Add those all up, we get to a new levy limit of $20,173,974, to which we add previously approved what we call excluded debt. That is voter approved debt to fund principally capital construction projects that include the safety building and the library and such. So our maximum allowable levy under Proposition 2.5 for fiscal 2015 is $21,205,099. We cannot levy more than that amount.
Thank you. Mrs. Luck, you had a question.
You mentioned that you expected house values to increase next year.
Yes.
How often do you reevaluate property values?
We're actually compelled to revalue all properties every year. I mentioned the triennial revaluation. Actually, it's a triennial audit, what we call a certification of values that bring, in which we see the Department of Revenue come in and over the course of a year evaluate all of our assessment practices. We provide numerous reports that provide market support for the valuations that we develop, and long and the short of it, we revalue every year. I would like to point out, though, that our values do not represent current value. There's a common misconception about assessed values. Assessed values lag behind current market. The sales data that we use to evaluate our assessments and are drawn this year from calendar year 2013 sales. So 2014 sales, the past 12 months sales will go into the formulation of next year's values.
Okay, so you look at similar houses that sold in 14 and then in 15 and figure out the bump?
We don't use a comparable sales process per se. We will on a tax appeal, but what we do is we take our assessed values on properties that have sold from the 2013 sales period, divide the assessed value by the sale price to come up with what we call an assessment to sale ratio. And when you look at those ratios, you are able to determine whether our values are at fair market value relative to the sale prices, or if we've overstated values or understated values. We're also looking in our analysis at patterns of over and under assessment, certain biases that might have crept into our assessments, and we're compelled to eliminate those biases. So, for example, if a certain type of property was undervalued relative to other properties, we would be compelled to go into our valuation system, that is all of our land and building tables, and modify those tables to yield better values, or values that better approximate fair market value.
So you run these calculations every year?
Every year.
Okay. Thanks.
It's an elaborate process.
Yeah, sounds it.
Any other questions for Mr. Scheid?
The only note that you have 33 million in personal property on the assessed values, does that include the solar projects?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And does that include the electric wires and cable wires?
Yes, it does.
It seems like that's the largest amount.
Coming into reval year, I realize that every year it's done, but as we go forward, and then you're saying we're going to be, as you commented, bottomed out, would indicate that next year it'll either stay the same or start increasing. That
Yeah, preliminary review of calendar year 2014 sales and a comparison of our assessments against those would suggest that we might see some modest increase in assessed values next year.
okay. So only from seeing it myself at different times in my, in my periods living here, I mean, obviously, assessed values don't go up. I mean, you'd love them to go up evenly, but different homes, different types of homes sell more, and so the data, the real estate data is higher and everything. And so in a year that's happening, seeing that we only have right now $150,000 in the overlay, do you feel that's enough, or can we put more in the overlay in the anticipation that there may be, going into that year, that there's going to be more arbitration or more dialogue for abatements?
I'd like to say that we do such an outstanding job that there's no need for folks to file abatements, yet we know that it's an imperfect process. We're dealing with mass appraisal techniques, which do from time to time yield assessments that may be overstated relative to the market. And we certainly encourage people that have a compelling argument to file an abatement, and we will grant abatements where they are due. Our track record, I think, has been fairly outstanding. The appeals that we see from year to year have been in decline. I don't have any reason to believe that we'll see a surge in abatement applications, and I feel comfortable with the overlay that we've set aside.
And certainly doing the update of the values every year makes a big difference compared to the way it used to be, that every 3 to 4 years you'd have a big jump with the reevaluation, whereas if you adjust it every year, then people are more realistic about what their property is worth.
Sure. I'm just issuing it just as a protective nature of, from the town. It was not meant at all to talk about the fine work that you do as a regional assessor or the Board of Assessors do. It's just more of a protective mechanism for the town.
Yeah.
Because as we're talking about state cuts, okay, in the budget, it would be, it would not be a good scenario, however improbable, that we would run into, that we would have to outlay more than we have in the overlay, and having to make up shortfalls that we may be looking at already. And I know the town manager probably will give us an update later on about what's happening at the state.
So just to give you an actual number, last fiscal year, 2014, we granted 8 abatements, totaling $466,000 in valuation. If all of a sudden we went from 8 to 16, it still wouldn't, in actual abated tax dollars, wouldn't amount to a significant number. In fact, most of our assessor's overlay account goes to fund statutory exemptions for elderly and veterans. And the lion's share of the overlay fund funds those exemptions. A very small portion goes back to property owners that have seen overvaluation of their properties.
The other question I have is on the debt exclusion. Is there any of the new school in there yet?
Only a very small amount is shown. Anything we borrowed prior to the 9 million issuance would be included here, but it's a very small amount of that project.
Most of that's slated for next year.
Right.
You were going to ask something.
I think the other thing that's paid out of the overlay would be the senior tax work-off program.
That's right.
Do you know how many people we have participating, and if we have more people that want to participate but can't because of funding?
I saw that report earlier in the afternoon, and I can't remember what we grant in the way of senior work-off funds. My recollection is somewhere around $10,000. I can't speak to whether we are presently filling all of the jobs. I know in the past we've actually had difficulty finding folks that were willing and able to sign up for some of the assignments.
I think one thing you might see going forward, especially with the school construction project, is that there may be more seniors who are interested in that senior tax work-off program because of the increase in the tax bill, and where we have some tax, where we're under the levy limit, this might be a year that you maybe want to increase that funding in anticipation of more people being interested in the program.
Exactly. So that's another reason for doing that.
Mm-hmm. The overlay account is not something that's appropriated by town meeting. It's something that, it's a non-appropriated expense. It's often, if you go back to look at the budget, there's an estimate of $150,000. It often doesn't end up being what the estimate is, because we use that to for rounding, to account for rounding, and sometimes it ends up being higher than that just because of that reason. But because it's not appropriated, there isn't an issue with this board suggesting there be more in that overlay account, either to account for projected increase in the number of requests for abatements because of the triennial reval, or because of the senior tax work-off program.
And when, is there a deadline when we would have to do that? Is it possible after this classification?
Once you sign off on the tax rate, we are in a position to submit the recap to the Department of Revenue.
And so that it would be before we did that?
It would be,
We would have to do that?
you would have to do that, right.
And when does this have to be signed?
We are awaiting your signature to submit the document. This is the last step in the process, right?
It is.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a believer in the single tax rate. I know Leominster has a single tax rate, and Fitchburg is working to reduce its higher commercial rate down to its residential rate, and that takes a lot of work, transferring that burden. I might have a different opinion if we had a larger tax base with a taxpayer who might be able to accommodate additional taxes. Certainly the way we are at this point, the slight benefit to the residential side certainly doesn't justify the major change to the commercial, so I support the factor of one.
I support the factor of one as well.
It makes sense.
Yep. Before we sign off on this, one of the reasons, there's two reasons I brought up the overlay question. First of all, I brought up the overlay question because of the reasons that town manager and the ones I stated to Harold as well. But the second question is, this number coming in when it has with the four, it's principally due to the 40R. We are going to be under the levy limit of $285,000 that we were all assuming that was going to be collected. With the situation with town, with the state, I meant, budget, this puts us in a precarious situation of losing that money for anything at all. It just goes away. And this is a time when we keep hammering, staying within the levy limit and doing everything we can and taking things off that we can't do because we can't afford it. It seems to me, and I'll just go on the record as saying, as imprudent to just not collect that, seeing how the state is very likely The governor's already proposed cutting it. The House, under DeLeo, has said, no, he's not going to touch state aid, the local aid. But we don't know how long that's going to last. And here we are, we're not going to collect this money. The only option that we have to hold on to that is by putting it in an overlay account, because it's the only non-appropriated piece. So I, for one, would, because once we sign off on this classification, that's that.
May I comment?
Sure.
So in getting to a Department of Revenue certified tax rate, which is the next step in our process here, one of the many forms that we submit is not only the tax recap, but our overlay history and charges against that history. And if we were to inflate the overlay figure, we would certainly call into question or be called to account for why we're inflating that overlay number and not using it for tax rate reduction. Yes, you could attempt to add $250,000 to the assessor's overlay, but we'd likely never get approval from the Department of Revenue to do that. They would rather that the town convene a special town meeting and appropriate that money, and that we're kind of.
But that is not, by statute, by the time we have to declare a classification, that's not even, I don't believe.
It's not even
logistically possible.
No, with notification timeframes and that, it'd be impossible to hold a timely meeting. I hear what you're saying, but I'm afraid that we would have a real challenge throwing that money into the assessor's overlay and getting approval of a tax rate with a higher overlay number.
Even if we wouldn't appropriate all that we're under, I mean, we could probably, again, I think some of the valid points that we brought about today, we could justify a higher number. Again, I think as part of the board of the executive body of the town, again, I think it's imprudent that because of the timing of the town, the state telling us when we're getting these funds, leaves us no option except leaving this kind of money that the town, could have, used in some very real projects like the design of Summer Street, like road repair, like other things that didn't happen because of things that they are now appropriating to us.
Well, it's unfortunate that those revenues or notification of those revenues came at such a late date.
My point.
I'm not sure how we would remedy that short of a special town meeting. And the problem in throwing it into the assessor's overlay account is I would be asked to justify or provide an argument for an increased overlay figure, and I'd have to come up with a compelling argument that instead of 8 abatements, we're anticipating 50, 60, 70 abatements, and with a track record that shows fewer and fewer abatements with every year that goes by. It's going to be a difficult argument to make. I hear what you're saying, and I'm not disagreeing.
I'm frustrated by the fact that something that we've been fighting for in the 40S now comes to us, and basically we get penalized yet again for it. And so I'm frustrated by the fact that, again, the timing and the calendar of the state continually, whether it's in the budget in the spring or now, continually works against us.
Point taken.
I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but you know, I've been through this game before where we lost 400 and some odd $1,000 once of one time, you know, of under the levy limit because of some expenditure that came to us unbeknownst to us back like 10 years ago. And, you know, again, it's money that the town would have appropriated elsewhere because it still keeps us under 2.5.
So I was curious, when I undertook the 40S reporting in September, in my exchange with the folks that administer that program in Boston, I had absolutely no clue, even after providing all the information that they were asking for, whether we were going to get 10,000
Right.
or a million. Just no clue.
Well, neither did they, I'm probably guessing. You know those ping pong balls that they pick out the lottery numbers? When they're not using them for that, that's how they appropriate money, it seems.
And so it will be interesting when we receive the spreadsheet to be able to analyze that and hopefully glean some understanding about what we might anticipate in the future. My understanding is that there's this fixed sum of money, and if you have two communities that qualify, you're dividing the pot by those two communities. If next year 20 communities qualify and apply,
Kind of like the CPA in that regard.
exactly like the CPA.
Is there anything we can do with the overlay at all that would be justifiable in your opinion?
I suppose we could raise it by some modest 10 or 20,000, but you go much beyond that, and
Well, whatever we can do. I mean, again, I'm not looking to raise eyebrows. I'm looking to fight for what I think is best for the town, so. Does everybody on the board, I mean, know where we're coming from with this? I don't know if that's clear.
My take on it is that as a result of this additional money that we hadn't planned on coming in, we're going to raise less taxes than we would have otherwise?
Yes.
Right.
Okay. So if we raise the overlay, we're raising taxes closer to what we had planned to at town meeting.
Right.
This is sort of a one-time revenue, not one time, it's the beginning of a revenue that we would now be including. It represents about 1.3% is what we're effectively saving compared to the 2.5% increase.
In the senior housing work-off program, do we know if individuals have been turned away from that program? Have we been able to fill all of the opportunities?
Well, that's what I was getting at, and
Yeah.
I guess we're not sure. I don't think that we've turned anybody away at this point. My thought was just going forward with the increase in the tax bill because of the school project, you may see people who weren't interested before in the program being interested in that. But we don't, that's just an assumption I'm making. I don't have any data to back that up.
Well, I think it's a good assumption. And so while I understand the point about the overlay, overinflating the overlay, I also think a reasonable argument can be made that with the expenditures that taxpayers are facing and the increased taxes that they're going to be facing because of the school project, that we've incorporated additional funding for those types of offsets. So I think that, I don't know that we can appropriate the whole $258,000, but I think raising that overlay somewhat does make sense.
I would agree in that regard. I think I can understand that we don't anticipate an increase in abatement requests, but we may anticipate an increase in interest for the work program. Do we have enough work? I mean, we're not sure if we turn anybody away, but is there enough work to substantiate an increase or a full enrollment?
I mean, we would have to come up with things. I would imagine at the senior center, for instance, they have a lot of people that volunteer. Any of that volunteer work could be senior tax work as well. So I think there's a big source right there.
So this is, in my view, a bit of a political decision, one that I'm glad I don't have to make. If you were to want to put some additional money into the assessor's overlay account, I'm prepared to go downstairs, crank some numbers, and come back in 15 or 20 minutes with the result.
I think the answer, well, I personally would be for it.
I
would.
be for it.
I guess the question is that, would you be coming up with, you're looking to us to come up with a number, and what you do is come back with what the effect is on the tax rate? Or are you kind of come up with a number?
Well, I would come back with the tax rate implication if you were looking to,
I mean, the reality is that we're looking at 1.3% of the taxes. So we'd be going from a 2.5% increase to a 1.2% increase. So we could either say, okay, great, we're going to not increase the taxes as much as we could, but I'm okay with doing a modest increase in the overlay in order to get to the point of not having scrutiny from the Department of Revenue.
Yeah, right.
And that, I would leave that to the town manager and the assessor to do that, because whatever we would be coming up with, it's still less than what town meeting voted with the expectation of taxes going up with 2.5 plus override, plus the new growth. And that really what's before us is to say we need to vote on the factor of 1, which if we come up with that, with the understanding that you're going to come up with as much overlay as is reasonable, I'd be fine with going that process, because do we need to know the actual tax rate in order to do the?
you don't, but the LA5 that you sign
Would change.
has the excess levy capacity
Right.
stated there. That excess levy capacity would be reduced.
So I would ask the town manager, is there no other mechanism beside that? Is that the only mechanism without town meeting that we are looking at?
The only other thing that we look at, which we've already looked at, is our local receipts estimate. So once we know we have a situation like this, we go back and look at our local receipts to make sure that those numbers are all good, and if we feel that any of those are overstated, then we might back some of those down. The problem we have, but then we have to justify that to the Department of Revenue as well, so they will look at the prior year actual collections, and anytime we're estimating something less than the prior year, they would ask us to justify why. We already have submitted local receipts $50,000 less than the prior year, and we have valid reasons for doing that. It would be difficult to reduce that any further as well.
Well, in absence of a number, and just to choose a round number, I would say if we can increase that by 50,000, that would be great. We'd save something.
Right. And it's the same number that I was thinking, so I would
So
agree.
I can run downstairs, plug the number in, and come back, say in 15 to 20 minutes. If you want to recess.
No, I'll continue the, continue or recess the public hearing
we'd
for
probably
15 minutes and
Recess
go on.
the hearing.
Yeah, so we'll recess the hearing for this hearing until your return in approximately 15 minutes, and we'll go on to other business.
Okay.
Is that okay, everybody, with the?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Any concerns?
I guess if we're talking about 50, I probably would be looking at lowering something in local receipts. I think 50 in overlay is going to raise eyebrows, but you can do what you
Well,
need to do.
the question that will be posed to me is you're increasing your overlay account by $50,000. Are you anticipating
Increased senior.
increased Abatements, your track record doesn't prove that. I think there's a compelling argument
For the senior,
for the senior project. I could hold, I think 50,000 would probably fly. Clearly 250 would
No,
not.
I understand.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Is was the pilot in local receipts?
Yes,
So did we pull that out of local receipts?
yes, we
So-
did.
So you've already done that?
Yeah.
So we don't have the ability? Because I would think that if you could do 30 to 40,000 in local receipts, various places, I don't know.
Yeah,
With permission, I'll be back in 15 minutes.
Okay,
Okay, thank
we'll be
you.
here.
all right. It would be helpful if I could work with him while he's doing this, and I'm just trying to figure out how to do that. So perhaps you could, there's somebody in the audience for the right of first refusal.
Can we hold that? Do we have all the information we need, and then we can recess the whole meeting if you need to work with Harlan? Is that?
No.
Let me do this. Let me
I'll
run the
meet
numbers.
with
I'll
you in
run
a
the
few-
report,
Need the
and then
committee
if I can
reports.
confer with Carrie for 2 minutes, 3
sounds
minutes.
great.
Yeah, why don't we do that?
Okay,
Okay.
great.
Thank you.
All right, so while that public hearing is recessed, we are going to go to the continued discussion about considering and acting on the right of first refusal of the Pellerin property at 90 West Townsend Road. There were some questions at our last meeting concerning this property.
So at the last meeting, you had asked some questions regarding the surrounding property, and I had the assessors put together a map, which is in your packet, and we've identified all of the property owners surrounding the property in question, and you specifically asked if any of the property was held in chapter for any of the surrounding properties, and there is no other property adjacent to that property that has a chapter designation on it. And then you had asked about the conservation property that was acquired, deeded over to the town in 1974. So again, this was sent out to the Open Space Committee, the Conservation Commission, and the Planning Board, as well as the Department of Public Works. Both Open Space and Conservation looked at the property relative to their acquisition criteria and determined that the property was not, did not meet the criteria of either of those boards. The Planning Board did note the proximity to the current DPW facility. The DPW director reviewed the proposal and mentioned, while it would be nice to have this property, it wasn't something that he thought would be a high priority for the town.
Mr. Chairman, looking at the map, it looks like the conservation land is landlocked.
Northfield, yeah.
Is that correct?
like
Oh, I did check that with Conservation, and they do have a 20-foot easement down to
On the left.
West Townsend Road.
On the left, right there, it looks like.
Between
Oh, the
parcels.
West Townsend Road.
I
Between
believe-
parcels 34 and 35.
Well, so that would be Northfield.
No,
Well, no, it
To
shows,
Northfield.
I think,
No, it's
I
West
think it is
Townsend.
Northfield.
It is,
because
okay.
It
Yeah,
shows on the
no.
bottom.
Right, that's what I thought. Jan said the easement was down to West Townsend Road.
Yep.
Was down to West Townsend?
yeah, between parcels 34 and 35.
Yeah. This whole thing here.
Oh, okay, on the other map, okay.
Yeah.
Well, given that none of the town departments are interested, I don't have a problem releasing it. I guess this raises a question in my mind, however, about this 3.4 acre parcel of conservation land as to whether or not it's utilized. And, if we don't have a concern about the Pellerin property, which is substantially larger, I would just wonder if retaining that in conservation makes sense, or whether or not we should look at doing something like we did for other lands, is seeing if abutters are interested in it, or, because to me, to have a 3-acre parcel that has an easement through a residential property doesn't make a lot of sense. And if conservation isn't interested in acquiring frontage for that parcel, then it just raises questions into my mind as to whether or not that should be back on the tax rolls.
I tend to agree.
That property
that's-
is controlled and under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission, so we need to have the
Right,
discussion
and I'm
on
just saying I would like to have that discussion, because frankly, given the fact that it does abut conservation land, and if we were able to acquire it now, instead of a 3-acre conservation parcel, you now have, a 14-acre parcel. It just surprises me that conservation is willing to let that go, but yet we still have a piece of property that really has limited, extremely limited access.
So I'd entertain a motion on the right of first refusal before us. If anybody would like to take action and make a motion.
I just have a question. We talked a little bit last week, and I know the building reuse hasn't had a chance to look at this property, but we talked a little bit at the last meeting about possibly looking at a site for a new town hall, should that be the route that makes sense once the building reuse has completed its work, and I know you haven't done that.
Well, we haven't had a discussion about this piece of property in particular, but we are debating some feasibility for other possibilities beyond the town hall, but they were all in town center, and I would venture to speak for the building reuse and say that this particular piece of property would not serve any need that would address our main charter, which is kind of to make more use of the property we already own.
Okay. Okay, therefore, given the fact that planning board, conservation, and building reuse and open space do not feel it worthwhile to retain, I would make a motion that we indicate that we do not want to exercise our right of first refusal on the Pellerin property at 90 West Townsend Road.
Second.
Second?
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. So,
Could we just follow up with Conservation Commission regarding that 3-acre parcel at some point and get some information from them on whether or not that property is utilized?
Yes.
okay, let's go to committee reports and have the town manager work with the regional assessor. So, Board of Health.
Is this when we string this out?
Yes, talk slowly.
No report from the Board of Health. Sorry.
No report. Building Reuse Committee.
The Building Reuse Committee met last evening and spent most of our time talking about the use, as we discussed it at our last meeting, the use of town-owned property for municipal office purposes. The original proposal was town hall. We are now recommending that we make a proposal to the Capital Planning Committee to do an assessment, a feasibility study, a very focused, data-driven feasibility study to look at town hall, but also to look at other town center properties like the Ritter, the old primary school, and although it's not part of our charter at the moment, TC Passios. And that's our recommendation to be considered as an FY, excuse me, 15 capital expenditures. So if it was approved as part of the budget process, that feasibility study would happen at the beginning of next year.
And,
Next fiscal year.
Yeah.
Okay.
and what are you trying to determine which of these three would be?
Well, the current proposal, and we talked about this a little bit last week, at our meeting last week, the current proposal said to address town hall as the municipal office building. And we were doing an assessment of what construction would be required, what renovation would be required, et cetera. And the new thinking was that for the amount of money it looks like that's going to cost, would it be more reasonable to do that at either what we call the green space, which is why Mrs. Bertram was talking about available property to just kind of start from scratch and build a municipal office. But also to look at existing buildings that the town owns, like the Ritter, like the old primary school, and all or a piece of the TC Passios. So we want to be data-driven about, here's what it would cost, here's the benefit, what would that do to the marketability of those 4 properties, and to be able to present at a town meeting to the town, here's some choices you have, but here's the cost and benefit, or lost benefit, as the case may be, for those decisions.
Are there any of these buildings that you can dismiss out of hand because they don't have enough room?
Actually, we dismissed a couple of them out of hand because they had too much room. But that's why we're going back to revisit that.
So Passios and the primary both have too much room, is that right?
To be used exclusively as municipal offices, yes.
And the Ritter's too small?
No, the Ritter might be the right size with renovation. But the.
You wouldn't have to add on?
Town Hall would require an awful lot of renovation as well.
This is probably just a really wild. Is there ever any consideration to raising Town Hall and building a structure that looks like Town Hall in its place?
The answer
I
is
think
it
the
could
closest thing to that is to build a municipal office in a place other than the 4 I mentioned. But then the fact that we currently own the building we sit in right now becomes, what do we do with that?
Right.
One of the downsides of using this building is its lack of parking, among several others.
As the Town Hall, you mean?
As the municipal office building for the entire town. Or even as a marketable property, frankly, but.
Almost worse for marketable property, right?
Well, it depends on what you market it as.
It's my understanding that studies have been done formally, and I have never seen them, but it's my understanding that previous studies have been done on the feasibility of converting the old primary school into a town hall. I don't know if you're aware of that or if you've ever seen them, but I've been told by a resident that there have been several studies of the primary school in the past, specifically for use as a town hall. Are you aware of any of them?
I'm aware of them. I haven't seen them. It was prior to a long period of time when it was being considered as senior housing, and the old primary school has aged, if you will, in that time frame. So now we are going to look at it again on a very high level, not with engineering drawings and construction, but some data-driven estimates on cost and space and kind of schematic designs, but not architectural designs.
Those reports may be helpful. I mean, I'm assuming somebody at some point went through.
Yeah, I did go through them.
With the primary school,
yeah.
so.
And actually, the reports on the work that was done on the town hall, the most extensive one, not the McKinsey report that we're kind of working from, but the one prior to that had to do with the total renovation of town hall to the tune of $10 million with an expansion and a redevelopment. So that material has been helpful, but it's not what you'd build a plan off of.
Okay, so I just want to be clear. So you are continuing to look at the primary school, even though I know it may be too large, and I guess I would question, perhaps there's a multi-use component to that. But you are incorporating that building into this feasibility study?
Yes, and then the only clarification I'd say is we're not continuing, we're starting to, because
Okay.
that joined us at a late period when the senior housing process went away.
So the 3 buildings you're going to be specifically looking at are the town hall, the Ritter building, and the primary?
And for discussion purposes, the Passios,
Okay.
although that's not yet part of our reuse charter.
Okay.
Thank you.
And anyone is welcome to come to our meetings and have these discussions at a very detailed level.
And you're looking at all of them as a potential town hall.
Right.
Okay, we got 2 reports in. We're going to unrecess. and continue the public hearing on the tax classification.
All right, so increasing the tax rate from $18.27 per thousand to, by 5 cents to $18.32 per thousand adds, and I think I gave my document to Carrie, but I think it's a little over $50,000. I think thank you. Our assessor's overlay goes from $150,000 to $207,000. That would represent about a $12 per year increase on the average residential property.
Thank you. And you didn't do anything with local receipts,
I
right?
did not, no.
Okay. I think given the scenario and the late time in the calendar, I think this is the best we're going to come up with. And I appreciate Harold, yours, and the town managers working with us to amend it as such. So the first, I guess I have to read this vote, right? So the proposed motion, the Lunenburg Board of Selectmen votes in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 56, as amended, the percentage of local tax levy which will be borne by each class of real and personal property relative to setting the fiscal year 2015 tax rates, and set the residential factor at 1.0 with a corresponding SIP shift of 1.0, pending approval of the town's annual tax recap by the Massachusetts Department of Revenue.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Thank you.
Great, well, thank you.
And this will be set down to the line for our signatures. Am I putting today's date on it?
And does this one, that form?
Today's the second?
Yeah.
Well, we spiced it up a little bit this year.
Welcome relief.
Okay.
Okay.
I just want to verify that. That's the reduced levy. You've reduced the levy capacity and modified the form based on adding that?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
We haven't reduced the levy capacity,
Well, the
excess levy.
excess levy.
I'm sorry, the excess levy
That was the
capacity,
excess.
yes.
It's now about 201,000. I think.
201, right?
So, in the arena of timing, if we had set this, instead of this 40S coming in at October 31st, if it had come in at December 5th, after this meeting, this would have changed everything, correct?
We would have levied closer to the levy limit, and that money would have come in and become part of free cash, yes.
Right.
Yeah. The state, even though we can't appropriate that 40S smart growth, the state requires us to use that in calculating available revenue for tax purposes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Pleasure. See you this time next year.
You got it. Enjoy it. Thanks again, Howard. All right, we'll hold off, we'll go in order, we'll come back to committee reports in due time. Board of Selectmen goals and Town Manager goals. That is now, should be part of your packets. Was it part of the packet?
It is, yeah. It is close to the end. Keep going.
I'm going.
There you go.
There we go. Okay. So, I don't know what further we have to do. We basically have come down to 5 goals as listed here. The establishment of personnel policies and annual evaluations, the establishment of department metrics and periodic updates from departments, the formulation of an economic development plan, a written vehicle rotation policy and the schedule of useful life of vehicles and equipment, to come up with some kind of long-term spreadsheet indicating when we predict vehicles will be expired and replaced. And then continued progress in the tax takings and provide periodic updates to everything that's in some kind of tax limbo. Anything further to add to those?
I just had, Mr. Chairman, I just have a question on the economic development component. It's on the town manager's goals, it's on the BOS goals. We were in the process of having a meeting with the planning board that got interrupted and I assume is going to be continued. Is there a... Is it, I think the discussion at that particular meeting was what is the overall objective to then start talking about an economic development component. And if that's what this means from the BOS, I'm on board. But if it's a shared goal, I think it just requires a little bit of discussion on it's shared, but who owns it and who's responsible and what does it look like when we're done?
Well, I don't want to, my own personal opinion is that it is such a large component that touches so many different employees and elected bodies that it really should be on a lot of people's goals. Because I think their
Agreed.
participation, A, is crucial, B, they take it from a different angle. Everybody's perspective is going to be different from their perspective of what their role is. And I think the fact that it's on everybody's list, and I'm sure it's on the planning board, their own list, is because of the essential nature of that development plan. I mean, that would be my take on it. I don't think they are conflicting. I think that is everybody, rowing in the same direction, presumably.
I guess the question I would have is that how would Carrie know that she succeeded and how would we be able to measure her on economic development as we intend her to do something? So this is, the topic by itself is such a big topic.
Right.
So is it to coordinate with the town departments and the planning board and the land use director to make sure that we have an economic development plan and action steps are developed?
I think that's the only way. I agree with you. That is a very important criteria, because back when we judge somebody, if we don't have,
Right.
but I don't think we can develop the criteria without going through part of the process to begin with.
Right.
I think that's the beginning part of the process, is what, we have a big starting point from the master plan, from the economic development plan from the planning board. And I don't know that that's the entire portion of it. I think there's other pieces of that, and I think we have to establish them. I don't have them off the top of my head right now, and I don't know where the discussion will lead.
And so I guess I'd be fine with leaving this as a goal with a duty of ours to come back to us within a month or two and flesh this out so that we would actually have a full, here's what Carrie's going to be expected to do. I mean, it's going to probably be the same thing for us.
Right.
Economic development policy beyond what the planning board's doing as part of the master planning process.
Okay.
The only other thing that we had talked about, and I don't know if we remembered whether we were going to keep it as a goal or whether it was a task, was updating the town's website. And whether that was town manager or whether that was Board of Selectmen.
We talked about a website committee, and I don't know.
Right, so the website committee would be one thing. I think keeping the website updated is really, you know,
I-
through the town manager to the IT director would be a day-to-day thing.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about a redesign of our website to bring it into the 21st century. Or, I mean, it does a lot of good things, and considering how things change so quickly, it actually does a lot of good work in a lot of places, but there's a lot of places that there's a lot of holes that we need to really have that committee come up with a policy and then turn it over to the town.
Well, I think that, I mean, from somebody in this field, I think the issue is that we can't expect an IT director to run the IT of the town and run a website, especially one that is as dynamic as we're asking, that things get put on and things get taken off, and every election cycle you have to change who's in where. I mean, I think we need to at least entertain the notion that we need either a volunteer board to do it or another additional staff to do the website. I mean, there are some wonderful things you can do with websites, but you know, it needs people paying attention that that's their primary focus. And I think that the IT director, I don't know that that can be his primary focus.
And I think that it needs to stay with us at the moment for developing policies. So for instance, the sewer commission has all its policies. The planning board has its policies. You can get the zoning thing there, other things like that. The Conservation Commission has some things, but not their entire rules and regulations. The Board of Health doesn't have their information there. So there ought to be a policy committee for what needs to be on
I
there.
agree with that. And that's why we talked about a website committee. And I'm all for that. I've been for that for years.
Okay.
I think we have enough people in this town who work in the IT arena, that I think we can get a good group of people if we asked.
So the question becomes, is that our goal or the town manager's goal?
I think the website committee is our goal.
Right, I would say
Okay.
it would be our goal.
All right. That being said, I'm fine with Carrie's goals.
Okay, so are you making that a motion?
Yes.
Excellent.
Second?
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. All right. So now we can review our goals. Appointment and reappointment policy, as has been discussed, and there's also some discussion regarding review of all the policies. Well, I think part of our task is we always should be reviewing these. I mean, we just went through a whole big review and we got most of it done. It's probably not a bad idea always to peruse through them. I have to come with a boot policy, which I do have. We just have not, we just have not voted on it. But appointments and reappointments, I feel we
have
need
to come
to
back
address.
to that,
Yep.
yep.
Stormwater management, discussion about policy, maybe the master plan, and maybe fee implementation. So we can certainly take one component of this. I think that we will have to do this with planning board.
I think it's planning board, and I also think it's conservation commission, and it's a stormwater utility is what that,
Okay.
when we say maybe fee implementation, is the creation of a stormwater utility. And actually, I've found on the state website that there is a whole document called How to Create a Stormwater Utility. It's very large, and I'm in the process of going through it, but
Okay.
I think we need to look at that, especially with the development that's happening and the structures that are being incorporated with those developments, so.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the presentation to those who were there, and it was, we didn't talk about this in the announcements because it's kind of a few weeks ago, but that stormwater presentation was excellent with a lot of interesting and really solid information and a way of looking at things with this, with a particular set of, with a particular vision that I think eludes us in normal passing. You don't think about what happens to stormwater. You don't think about all the sediments and all the places the water goes before it goes back and going back into bodies of water and back into not going into the water table would be fine, but it's the stuff that gets into creeks, that goes into rivers, that goes into ponds and lakes, that really is the cumulative effect of sediment, of detergents and fertilizers and things like that. So I think it certainly is clear that we have to play a part in this, and I think all those other boards you just mentioned, we need to play a big part.
Right.
And maybe we can get a focal group together to really start establishing from town what we need to do on all different aspects, whether it's a stormwater utility, what we want to put in the development review plan and discuss with the planning board, what they may want to implement, what with the DPW, talking about maintenance, we talked about that. Mrs. Bertram has brought that up many times. I think these are all really important, and this really is, I think, aside from economic development, probably one of the biggest goals that we have.
I agree wholeheartedly.
When I was at the Mass Department of Revenue 2014, What's New in Municipal Law seminar, they talked about the Municipal Water Infrastructure Investment Fund, which was effective in August 6th. It permits up to a 3% surcharge on real estate tax, which require legislative body vote and approval of referendum by voters. Monies collected are deposited into a separate fund and may be appropriated for maintenance improvements and investments to stormwater infrastructure assets. So that's a way that was just.
But it has to be passed by the town.
Yes.
What is it called?
It's called the Municipal Water Infrastructure Investment Fund.
So it's just something a body can do. There's no matching funds for this, I'm assuming.
Right. It's just it's above 2.5.
So,
It's just
yeah.
a 3%.
So I don't
All of a
necessarily
sudden,
see that passing.
Twice in one day, I have to, all of a sudden I get the shakes from talking about the CPA, which had matching funds and didn't pass. So I think the town,
But part of the discussion is that you could have a utility district where you charge based on the impervious surface, or you have this. So this should be just thrown in the mix of
Sure.
financing of.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, no.
Absolutely, we should definitely
It's
look
just
at
a
it.
something we
vehicle.
have to
I hear your
Definitely
concern.
look at it.
Right, clearly something we have to discuss, but I think one of the things that we can do is, again, as Mrs. Bertram has said, that when new projects come in, new subdivisions,
Yes.
new buildings, that have all these catch basins, and we're gonna be taking these over, and we have no maintenance plan, and we have no equipment to do it, and we don't have the personnel to address it in the timely manner that it needs, these are the things that we can address in the development review.
We can absolutely impose a fee, and we can absolutely impose a requirement to appropriate funding and bonds to cover that
Right.
maintenance, and we're not doing that as a community.
And it'd be great to talk to the people in Leominster. They seem to have been working on this for a long time.
And in Leominster, I mean, there's numerous communities that are doing this. And, I've just started researching all the various regulations, and there is the ability to require standardized stormwater structures, which is something we don't do. So that if and when we are able to acquire equipment, we have the means to take care of it, because depending on the type of structure determines the different types of maintenance. So, there's a lot of discussions that we need to have.
And if developers know it's important to us, then they'll come ready.
Right.
Okay, so I think that definitely stays as a goal here. Revised town manager's evaluation form, so that we definitely need before the next evaluation, which is quickly coming upon us. Economic development policy we just talked about, and then improve communication with other boards. So I think, as evidenced tonight with the PAC, I think that's good, and we should from time to time, I don't know if it needs to be regular, but it should be periodic, let's put it that way.
Well, I know, is it written somewhere exactly what the charge of a liaison is?
Yeah, we've talked about it. I mean, we've talked about it several times, but the primary purpose, when it was instated, was to provide communication from that board back to this board that was informal and didn't require the other, didn't put any work on the other board to get it to us. So that we sat in and listened to the discussions and brought back to this board what was going on. To me, it was like writing, it's very much like writing minutes, right? It's well done as a liaison when you give people the heart of what was discussed without giving the blow-by-blow of what everybody said.
But it also works the other way, too, because there's been several times, I know, Paula's been at planning board, and I've been at other meetings where we've been able to share information from the selectmen's that they did not see our most recent meeting, or they didn't know what was going on, or they may not have understood what we were doing. And so it does provide a communication.
Two-way communication.
Bi-directional, absolutely.
And part of the discussion we were having when this got on the agenda was the discussion of what other committees are not included in the liaison structure. And based on, we need 7 selectmen in order to manage all of that process.
Well, there is one board that I think we really should have a liaison for, and that's going to be conservation. I think that is really, and potentially ZBA, but definitely conservation, I think, is something that we should have a liaison for.
I
So
agree.
we can talk about that,
During our planning process.
yes. So is everybody okay with those 5?
I think we should add 6. I think we should add a website committee.
Oh, right. Establish website committee? Website policy committee, or as opposed to implementate?
Right. Okay, with that addition,
I would make a motion to approve the 6 goals as outlined for the Board of Selectmen.
do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. All right, we are not goalless.
Now we just have to come up with a timetable when we're going to get
Well,
them done.
exactly. Well, we've
All right.
if it took us 6 months to come up with the goals, we have to really put it in high gear here. Number 3, adopt or the ratification of
That's
the modification, can't even say it wrong, to traffic rules and orders, the isolated stop signs at Mulpus Road and Townsend Harbor Road.
So when I went back and looked through your records, I did not find that you actually went through this process of adopting these stop signs. So I figured, this is why I listed adopt or ratify.
Okay.
But the request is that you approve the modification to the traffic rules and orders of the Town of Lunenburg Schedule for isolated stop signs to add on Townsend Harbor Road for northeastbound traffic at Mulpus Road, and to add on Townsend Harbor Road for southeastbound traffic at Mulpus Road.
So I'd entertain a motion on the adoption and ratification of these stop signs.
So moved?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? None. We're going to get in trouble for agreeing too much.
No, we're not.
Excellent. Number 4, authorize the chair to sign the project agreement for the local acquisitions for natural diversity, or also known as the land grant program, for the purchase of the Lane property.
So as you know, our land grant application was approved. We actually have a closing date just scheduled today for January 9th, 2015, to close on that property. Previously, you had authorized both Brandon Kibbe and I to act on your behalf to submit the grant application. This is the actual project agreement that requires the signature of the chief executive officer of the town, which is the Board of Selectmen. So this is a request for you to authorize your chairman to sign this particular agreement.
I would make a motion to authorize the chair to sign the project agreement for the land grant for the purchase of the Lane property.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Okay. Number 5, review and comments for the draft housing production plan.
So I just put this on your agenda to call attention to this. The draft housing production plan was first sent to you probably 2 or 3 weeks ago at this point. The land use director is scheduled to come to your meeting next week to receive any formal comments that you have. He could also make a brief presentation on the document at that meeting. I did ask him to put together a memo, which you have this evening, which just outlines the reason why we're doing this. But I wanted to get it on your agenda and request that you each, before the next meeting, make sure you go through the document, and if you have any comments, either bring them to the next meeting or send them to me ahead of time, and be prepared to put together a final list of comments at next week's meeting.
Excellent. Okay, back to committee reports. Capital Planning.
Capital Planning Committee met this afternoon. We went through the last of our input sessions from town directors. Jack Roddiquins was there representing both the facilities for all of town buildings and the individual capital requests for the DPW. Beginning next Tuesday, we will start to deliberate and prioritize the list in time for submission to the town manager.
Excellent. Finance Committee.
No report since the last meeting.
Library Board of Trustees.
Library Board of Trustees met on the 20th. They are in the process, they are going to have 2 long-term employee retirements over the next 6 to 7 months, so they're in the process of identifying how they're going to refill those positions. They started their budget process. Their January meeting, they've invited both the members of the Planning Board and the Building Reuse Committee to come talk to them to talk about the reuse that may go on around them as a result of the village district bylaw and the possible reuse of the Passio School. We understand that it's at least the second time that a town committee has used remote participation. Last time, apparently, at the Sewer Commission was from a person at work in Japan, and this time we had a person in work in China, Skyping into the Library Board of Trustees and was able to participate. They had, as required by our requirements, they had a quorum physically present, and then he was able to participate in addition to that.
Excellent. MPO.
No report since the last meeting.
Planning Board.
I was not able to attend the last meeting, however, I know Mr. Ebersol was, which was a workshop on the village district bylaw, so I'll ask him to comment.
The Planning Board met, they've already done quite a bit of work on the language of their proposed village district bylaw. Adam did a lot of work of cleaning up some of the language to make it simpler. The board had already done probably 3/4 of the way through and did another almost the rest of the way through, but then came up with additional questions. They are continuing to figure out how they need to do outreach to the people in the center district, and that they're going to outreach in various ways to try to get other people involved in there. They are talking about having a companion article of an architectural review board, not in a historic district that would fully control development, but would take care of major changes to historic buildings during the village district bylaw. And they were talking about how they wanted to make sure that both of those components were adopted at town meeting, because one without the other wasn't something that they really wanted to do at this point. So I raised the concept of they need to clearly have all of that, what the design standards would be for that board before town meeting would approve that as a recommendation. They have made the district smaller than originally provided, and they are want to, I'm not sure if they put it on their website yet, but they were talking about adding it to the website so people were going to have access to looking at that. They've got, they don't have a clean copy yet without all what it used to be, and I think that would make a difference for people actually looking at what the bylaw is. I'm still concerned with the historical impacts and what I call the unintended circumstances that might happen as a result of adopting a bylaw that will change the center of town dramatically.
Has this been, because the historic district is lies largely, if not totally, in the village bylaw map, have they discussed this yet with the historical commission?
They forwarded the proposed plan and the language to them for their comments, and they did not receive those back before the planning board meeting.
Excellent.
Did they talk about, I know you said that they're talking about trying to get public input somehow. One of the concerns that I have is the meeting, I wasn't able to attend, so I went to look for it on YouTube, and it wasn't televised, and that's a concern, because if they're going through it, that detailed, I think that's an opportunity to people to learn about it, so I was disappointed that it wasn't televised. Have they set the next hearing date on it, and do you know whether or not they're planning to have it, or set it for another meeting to make sure that one is televised?
I don't know about when they were going to have the next meeting. They were talking about trying to get something done by December, but they're working on other plans, on other concepts as well, and whether they were, I think they were looking at something later in December, and Chairman Joanna talked about the need to have things televised, to do outreach. She said she didn't want to have another the marijuana bylaw situation. They wanted to have enough feedback from everybody ahead of time. So I believe they understand the need for that. They talked about how they were going to reach out to people, whether they were going to do a mailing, another charrette with the actual language. So I think they understand the need to do that.
Okay.
You were mentioning that they had two bylaws or articles they want passed at town meeting, but they don't want to have one without the other. Can they make it just one?
That I had a debate with myself about that, of thinking about what the town moderator would say, because usually each article has to have its own purpose, and if it's a different purpose, you can't do that. So since it's going to be an entirely different section of the bylaw, and the question is whether it's a bylaw or a zoning bylaw. They're not sure at this point, so it wouldn't be an integrated part, and then they didn't know whether that bylaw should follow the historic district bylaws plus the village district, because they are not coterminous in many places. So they don't know at the moment, but that's the concern, is that if you had, and then it goes to the chair's discretion as far as how you order the agenda, which one do you want first, which you want second, and the fact is that some people may want the village district, but they don't want the architectural standards bylaw. So, and that's legitimate, town meeting gets to decide that too, but members of the planning board said, I won't support this unless this other part is there too. So I think that was just raised as we need to do that, and Adam talked about I need to focus on the village district and some other things before we get to that part. So they're really, I think the fact that we didn't have a fall town meeting is giving them a lot more time to get all of their ducks in a row.
Right. Could they withdraw the second one if the first one doesn't pass?
Oh, you could certainly move to
all right, so they
pass
can do
over.
that then.
The architectural standards bylaw that they're considering, is this going to be vastly different? One of the topics of the discussion at one of the meetings that I was at is obviously the concern is preserving historical buildings. Right now we have a demolition delay bylaw, but it delays that process. However, it doesn't prohibit the demolition. Is this something that's going to prohibit the demolition?
I believe that's the intent, that will get into that point.
Okay.
But again, with because effectively, you will never be able to fully prevent a demolition in case of safety and other things like that.
Absolutely.
That's stating the obvious.
Right.
But I just want to make sure the public knows that doesn't mean that doesn't happen. But the case would be is that there would be major changes to buildings would have to go through this board for approval first. It would not deal with paint color. It would not deal with, roof color, that type of a thing. But it would talk about if you're going to take off the entire side of your house and you're going to put cement block up. Okay, so I'm going to take the ultimate thing that would be different.
I think
But
we're going to have to see.
That's right. They have no language whatsoever
Right.
yet.
Right.
That was the first time I heard of something less than a full historic district bylaw versus a demolition bylaw. That's something in between that will protect buildings but won't necessarily go to the full level of a historic district.
Okay, PAC, finally joining the fold again.
Their first meeting is going to be December 16th at 6 p.m.
15th, isn't it?
15th, sorry.
I think it's a Monday, right?
Yeah, we're the 16th. Excellent. School committee.
I wasn't able to attend the school committee meeting because of the stormwater workshop, but Heather Soroka sent me some notes, and I read the ledger. So the school committee goals created during a recent workshop will be posted on the website for public feedback. The superintendent reported that the state is predicting a $385 million deficit. Unrestricted aid may be cut to towns. This could mean reductions to schools of at least $10K. The Special Services Director, Hanscom, has requested $1,857,932. Due to keeping a larger number of students in the town's district for this line item, the request is for $244K less this year than last. Special Services is also requesting $557,000 for transportation, which is an increase. And Chair Berthume questioned the fact that if tuition is going down as fewer students are being sent out, how could transportation be going up? So they're going to have to look at that line again. Facilities Director Londa reported that water is freezing in front of the entryway to the student parking lot at the high school, and that this is coming from the new field. Either the installation of a pump or swale will be needed to redirect the water flow. But it's, it's something that's more water issues. That's it.
Okay. School Building Committee, I was not able to attend the last meeting. Sewer Commission.
The only other item from last report, because they haven't met since then, is that they will be going before the Conservation Commission as part of the Sunset and Pratt Street sewer areas to make sure that they're compliant with that.
Excellent.
Tomorrow, right?
Warrants. So accounts payable is $908,528.17. Volume 1 and 2. Payroll, $651,349.33. And town manager reports.
I just have one. I wanted to give you an update on the status of our municipal electric aggregation plan. We are required to submit an annual report to the Department of Public Utilities. I'm sending you a copy of the report that has been submitted for calendar 2014. I apologize, I didn't format this in the best manner. I'm assuming you are most interested in data for residential meters. In calendar year 2014, we had between, let me see, we had in the neighborhood of 3,700 households participating depending upon the month, and we had a total savings for residential customers of $111,875. I'm going to put this up on the website. I know we have at least a few people in town who are following this and interested in this data. I thought that was interesting. I know that doesn't translate to a whole lot per household, but in the aggregate, I think it's fairly impressive.
Can you comment at all on the deficit that the state is projecting? My understanding is that there have not been any determined cuts, just been people making suggestions about where those cuts should be.
Well, the only determined cuts are, the governor has made cuts already in those portions, or that portion of the budget that he has control over. And he has requested authorization for 9C cuts, which would have the impact of cutting local aid. The Speaker of the House, I think, as was mentioned previously at the meeting, has said that he's opposed to that. And I haven't heard anything since that came out on what the status is. I originally looked at that, and based on what I saw, I thought we were looking at potentially $25,000 to $35,000 cut in the unrestricted general government local aid. The superintendent, I asked her to take a look at it. She mentioned the $10,000 in special education costs, but we haven't done any other analysis because there isn't anything to analyze at this point.
I also, I don't know if anybody here knows or if you know, but in my reading of the reports coming out of the MMA and also the news reports, indicated they were very clear that the deficit is not from a reduction in tax collection. So I'm trying to figure out where the reduction coming from.
It's
The
coming,
income tax rollback.
yeah, as a result of the economy getting better, there are certain standards by which we're slowly getting back to a 5%.
Ah, okay. So it was the reduction.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, appointments and reappointments. We have to ratify the appointment of Mark Holman to position of Equipment Operator of the DPW.
I don't know what else to say. This is we had a member of the Department of Public Works leave earlier in the fiscal year. This is a replacement of a budgeted position. Mr. Holman is a resident of the town of Lunenburg, has 20-plus years' experience working in this field, already has the required licenses, which is typically, we have trouble hiring people into these positions without the commercial driver's license and hoisting license. This individual already has those because of his prior employment, so he has a leg up. He does some contract work for us in the winter plowing, so he's somebody that is known to the department. In the police department, we have a kind of a past practice of hiring from our reserves because it gives us the opportunity to see employees. We've been able to do that somewhat in DPW because we do hire a number of individuals to do winter operations work. This is, the last 2 individuals we've hired are people who have come out of that program, so that's been of benefit to us.
Excellent. I would entertain a motion on the ratification of the appointment.
I would make a motion to ratify the appointment of Mark Holman to position of Equipment Operator at the DPW.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Okay, just under appointments, reappointments, 3 vacancies I want to just announce. So we have 2 for PAC. PAC has a quorum of 3. Again, their first meeting December 15th. But we have 2 vacancies there, and then 1 vacancy still on the Finance Committee. So if anybody's interested in serving those, please let us know via the Talent Bank forms, either online or at the town clerk's office. Any public comment from the board?
3 things, just, I don't necessarily have to have the answer right now from Carrie. Status of streetlights, the regional animal control officer process, and anything on the gas station in the center of town.
Any other public comment from the board? Any public comment from the public? Our next meeting, we have 2 more meetings this month, the 9th and the 16th. Next week, we're doing all the renewal licenses?
Yes.
So license renewals next week. Anybody who has, all the letters have gone out, so anybody who has not paid in full by next Tuesday at 7 o'clock will not be getting a renewed license. So if you're listening and you haven't done it, please do make the payment. Okay, I would entertain a motion. Well, actually, we're going into executive session, I'm sorry. And under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, subsection 9, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the government's bargaining or litigating position, and the chair so declares. This is concerning a status update on the town's Unitil case. We will not be coming back to open session.
So moved?
Have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, Mrs. Luck,
Aye.
Mr. Ebersol,
Aye.
Mr. Toll,
Aye.
Mrs. Bertram,
Aye.
and I from myself. Thank you and good night, everyone.
An overture by Telemann, Concentus Musicas of Vienna led by Nick